Well, hello, everyone. Happy Workers' Day. Welcome to Unions in Missoula panel discussion. If you were looking for the Trump rally, that's not here, sorry. My name is Mark Anderlich, and I will... What's that?
Nice hat.
Well, thank you, yes. My name is Mark Anderlich, and I will be tonight's moderator. I am currently the secretary of the Western Montana Democratic Socialists of America, DSA in other words, labor working group. I also worked for 17 years as an organizer and executive officer of Unite Here Local 427 here in Montana, in Idaho and Utah. And for 12 years, I was the president of the Missoula-area Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO. And some of you know me as the producer of the Missoula community radio show, Voice of the People, radio by and for the 99%. And we are recording our event. This is not amplification, this is for recording. And we're going to record this for a future broadcast, so stay tuned to that. I must note, too, that this event is one of over 1,000 May Day strong events happening all across the United States, in every state. Yay. And that's an amazing thing for May Day, right? On this International Workers' Day, we are faced with, front and center, the ugly face of oligarchy. While oligarchy is not a new thing for the United States, it is all but impossible to ignore today. As Aristotle taught us millennia ago, democracy, which is ruled by the majority of the people, which is the working class. Democracy devolves into oligarchy when the democracy fails to limit the accumulation of wealth. This is what Aristotle taught us. Democratic socialists believe that to fight oligarchy, the majority working class need to limit the accumulation of wealth by extending democracy into our economic system, in addition to reinstalling it in our political system. The question then is, how do we develop the power to democratize our political economy? One powerful way is through unions. Why is this? At the most basic level, unions are simply organized workers in their workplace. A union does not need to be legally recognized, though it helps. A union does not need a paid staff, though it helps. A union does not even need to be a majority of workers in the workplace, though it greatly helps. A union unites workers of different races, political beliefs, religions, and so on because it unites people based on class. Regardless of your political views or immigration status or your gender identity, you need to eat, to have decent housing, to have medical care and education, and so on. These issues are class issues, which are majority issues and must be a priority in any democracy. Unions also give people a chance to learn and practice democracy. Diverse workers make decisions together to campaign for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. And unions can show workers how much power they could have. For example, when an employer refuses to meet workers' demands, a strike, which is just a stoppage of work, is the ultimate and powerful tool of organized workers to force the boss to meet their demands. Why is this? Because the boss is not making profits if the workers aren't working. Or conversely, a political leader can't get things done if public sector workers aren't working. That creates a crisis, and a crisis means they are apt to start negotiating with you. A union can teach all of this and more. Tonight, we hope you will learn more about unions in the Missoula area and inspire you to think about organizing your workplace if you do not have a union yet, or joining a union if you have not done so yet. We will hear from, on the far end, Keith Suda of the DFTBA Workers Union, a new private sector independent union here in Missoula. Then we will hear from Melissa Boys and Katie de Grand Prix. Did I say that right?
You did.
All right. Of the Missoula Education Association, Montana Federation of Public Employees, NEA, AFT, AFL-CIO. That's an inside joke. Eric Fever taught me that one. A long-established public sector union affiliated with several national organizations. Then we will hear from Sam Forstag of the National Federation of Federal Employees, Local 60 of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, AFL-CIO, another long-established public sector union with several national affiliations. They will first give us a brief introduction to their respective unions. I will then ask some questions to help flesh out our understanding. Then we will ask you, our audience, to ask your questions of the panelists. So keep your questions handy for the end. But first, we will briefly hear from Stephen Clark of the Western Montana Workers Alliance and other about a remarkable challenge by the United Autoworkers Union for unions to prepare for a general strike 3 short years from today, May Day 2028. Stephen?
Good work, Mark. We appreciate all of you being here. Happy May Day. As Mark said, I am the chair of the Western Montana Workers Alliance, which is also the in conjunction with the labor working group of the Western Montana chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. It's a damn mouthful. So, what do we do? We're all volunteer organizers, myself, Mark, Rachel, Brian, and others. And our purpose is to help educate workers and to help them strategize organizing their workplace, whether it's forming independent unions or joining already existing unions or organizing within an already existing union that they're a part of. But more than that, our mission is to train everybody that that we come into contact with on how we do organizing, and it's a method called structure-based organizing. And what that essentially is building relationships with people in the workplace or wherever it may be. Montanans for Palestine, for example. Building one-on-one relationships, finding a structure or using the structure to achieve supermajorities. And once we achieve supermajorities, that's how we win power. So that's Western Montana Workers Alliance in a nutshell. Why are we here on May 1st, on International Workers' Day? Mark talked a little bit about the history of May Day, but I'm going to also start with a little bit of a history lesson. So, about 100 years ago, even before, workers were facing a lot of the same issues that we are now. Rising wealth inequality, poor wages, poor working conditions, all of that. And, okay, I'll do my best. Yeah. So, about 100 years ago, workers were facing a lot of the same issues that we are today. Rising wealth inequality, poor wages, poor working conditions, all of that, stuff that we hate. And the difference between now and then is that when workers got together to, in their workplace to fight for better wages, better working conditions, they formed unions, but they didn't have any legal rights, at all. And what this led to was a lot of violence in the streets, a lot of constant strikes. And in the decades leading up to the 1930s, it became increasingly more violent, more militant, and in the early 1930s, the U.S. economy started to kind of grind to a halt because of the strikes that were happening every single day. Sit-ins, walkouts, you name it, any type of strike. So in 1935, President, not Theodore, Franklin Roosevelt, decided he couldn't let that stand. Something had to be done about this. You can't just let the U.S. economy stop. So he passed the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA for short. And the purpose of this was twofold. One, it was to give, it was to codify the rights of workers to form unions and negotiate with their employers. But on the other hand, it was mainly just to get the strikes to stop and sedate workers for a little bit by giving them this and letting the U.S. economy get back to normal. So one of the things, we'll skip the whole process of forming a union for now, how that's done. So let's say majority of workers get together, they want to form a union. They form a union, and now they're negotiating with their employer. At the end of that negotiation process, there comes a collective bargaining agreement, or a contract. And one of the ways that this sort of defanged the labor movement in the 1930s and onward was two things that are added to most, if not all, collective bargaining agreements. The first is a grievance and arbitration system. And basically what that is a way for workers to file grievances. If the employer's violating the contract, then they can file a grievance. There's a whole legal framework for that. But the more important part of that is the no strike, no lockout clause. And what that did was, for the duration of the contract, it didn't allow unions to walk out on strike, and it didn't allow employers to lock out unions, also called an employer-side strike, which is how it stopped the strikes. So, fast forward to now. Why is this important? Why am I talking about some legislation from 100 years ago? Well, a lot of unions have existed within this framework for a long time, and a lot of them have given way to the rise of business unions, also called top-down unions. Basically, they're run like a corporation. You have the president at the top, and they make all the decisions, and there's some leadership here and there, but the members really don't get a say. And it really gives way to corruption. And some of you may know of the United Autoworkers, UAW for short. They were a business union like this until, I believe, 2023. The process started before that, but there was a reform caucus within the UAW that called, hold on, United Autoworkers for Democracy, right, Mark? That's right. Okay. And they used this structured organizing method that I was talking about before to get their members more involved, get supermajorities, and oust their leadership, and put in a new president of the UAW, and his name is Shawn Fain, who some of you might have also heard of. Since 2023, when he was elected, they have had in 2023, they had a very successful strike, and that was due in no small part to the structure-based organizing, the supermajorities obtained in UAW workplaces. And shortly thereafter, Shawn Fain began calling for a general strike in 2028. More specifically, he called for all unions in the country to negotiate for their contracts to expire on May 1st of 2028. And what that does, like I was saying before, there's a no strike, no lockout clause in most contracts. But if your contract expires and you don't have another contract agreed upon, then it's null and void. There is no strike, no lockout clause. And you can basically do whatever you want. You can go on strike whenever you want. Which means that if all unions' contracts expire on May Day, then all unions can strike at the same time. But why 2028? It gives us time to because structured organizing takes a lot of time. You've probably seen a lot of these protests happening, the 501 protests. They can be thrown together and you can protest in a day. But structure-based organizing takes a lot of time because you have to talk to every single person in the structure. 2 years ago is when he started calling for this, and we're kind of running out of time. 3 years from now is kind of a lot of time, but it's also really not. because what we're looking for is supermajorities. But I mean, why general strike? What are we? Why are we even talking about this? Because of the way that this organizing works, it gives us the most realistic possibility for fighting for the change that we want to see, for fighting for universal health care, the 4-day work week, paid sick leave, that sort of thing. And it's really, at least in my opinion, the best way that we can show the billionaires, the 1%, the oligarchs, that there are more of us than there are of them. And it's really the one way that we can achieve power. I think that's it. Does that cover it?
We have some bird commentary going on. And I was asked to remind all of you there's lots of food here. Help yourself. Don't be shy. Don't leave here hungry. Let's just say that. Well, thank you, Stephen. And now we're going to hear from Keith Suda from the DFTBA Workers Union.
IHG speaking into this.
Yes.
What are the levels? What are the levels for my stage-trained projection? All right. Yes, as he said, my name is Keith Suda. I serve at the pleasure right now as the treasurer of the DFTBA Workers Union. We're an independently organized, democratically run union. I'm a bit of an outlier here that we are not affiliated with a larger national labor union. We formed that way for many reasons, mostly because working as we do in a fulfillment warehouse that's locally owned and generally historically been responsive to workers' concerns, we felt that we could be most effective operating as our own entity, and also that we also that allowed us to group in more people of disparate professions who work in the warehouse, so that from clerical to design to warehouse packers like myself, who pack and ship orders, all could be rolled into one organization. Anything else that people really want to know about? Cool. That's it. Oh, when did we form? April of last year, we were voluntarily recognized. We are currently in the midst of negotiating our CBA. That has been dragging on now since October of last year, with an end in sight question mark. And I'll speak more to that from one of the points I think that's coming up later.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Katie DeGrandpré and Melissa Boyce from Missoula Education Association.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. My name's Katie DeGrandpré. I'm a Spanish teacher here in town. I'm a union member. Becoming a union member was pretty interesting, because at the time there wasn't much choice when you were hired. Your union president walked in on the first day of school and said, "Welcome to the union," and you signed some papers. It was very lovely, but yeah, that was my sort of introduction to union work 10 years ago. We're part of Missoula Education Association, and yeah, we're affiliated with lots of different things. We're affiliated with our Montana Federation of Public Employees, as Mark mentioned, which is our public employees union in the state of Montana. So the highway patrol is part of our union. Public nurses are part of our union. And so yeah, it's a big statewide union.
So hi, I'm Melissa Boyce. I teach social studies out of Big Sky High School, and I'm an MEA member. This is my third career, and my first one was actually as a labor attorney, representing rail labor unions, which are not under the NLRA, but are under the Railway Labor Act. And it's just very interesting for me to see the difference between the rail unions, Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Workers, and all of the related rail workers combine to support each other on every issue. and then coming to being a member of a teachers union and a public union, public employees, where we're representing lots of really diverse people. And I think one of the things that we're probably going to talk about, just like having an unaffiliated union where you're building consensus. I mean, that's what a union is. You're building consensus around ideas. And sometimes you can have consensus without a formal union, and sometimes you can have a formal union without consensus. And so I think that's really an important thing when we're thinking about general strikes. How do you build consensus?
And thank you. And next, we'll hear from Sam Forstag from Local 60 of the National Federation of Federal Employees. Sam.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam. I'm with NIFI, the National Federation of Federal Employees Forest Service Council. We are part of IAW, International Association of Machinists. That is due to a long history of labor raids and rivalries that's probably not worth getting into here. But here at NIFI FSC, we represent most of the 30,000 some Forest Service employees across the country. Broadly speaking, folks in the Forest Service who are bargaining unit eligible are below a certain pay grade, below GS9 on the general scale, and it's those folks and folks who are on organized, unionized forests. Here in Montana, all but one forest are currently organized, and that last forest that isn't is currently holding their vote to become unionized over on the Custer-Gallatin. That is ongoing and has about 2 weeks left, and I'm very hopeful that it's going to be successful. Our Local 60 covers the Lolo National Forest, Bitter National Forest, the Regional Office, Montana Technology and Development Center, and we have just over 700 folks in our local right now. I don't have to tell you, federal employees broadly are truly under attack right now. I actually ran late coming here because I was on a call about the latest provision that the House Oversight Committee just passed that would really gut federal employees, retirements, firefighters, and everybody else, and has, frankly, some really insulting provisions in it, like requiring a $350 fee if you want to be eligible for basic employment protections under the Merit Systems Protection Board. Things that would really have long-lasting consequences and that hopefully we can apply political pressure to prevent. I think maybe a relevant piece to add here is we are a federal labor union, so we can't bargain for pay and benefits in the way a lot of private sector unions largely do as a large function of what they do. The way that we are able to bargain is through public pressure and through lobbying our representatives and senators. So right now we have a group of 20-some folks in D.C., including someone from the Forest Service unit where I work, going to meetings with Republican and Democratic senators and congressmen, congresswomen, and pushing back against the pretty sweeping cuts that we're dealing with right now. And public pressure, as I keep telling my coworkers, that only works when you get out and when you're loud. And there's a lot of fear in the federal workforce right now about speaking publicly because you typically do get quite a bit of backlash. And I just keep trying to remind folks, your employer can't control what you do off the clock. Sometimes they can't control what you do on the clock in certain respects. And if we aren't willing to speak publicly about the terrible things going on, we can't expect the public to be angry and to back us up when the time comes. So I guess what we're all doing is a part of that, and I appreciate the time. Thanks, Mark.
Right. So we have just one private sector union represented here, and so I'll get to you in a second, Keith, but you talked about negotiating, how it's different than the private sector. Could you, one of the two of you, talk about negotiating also private sector, but it's dealing with the Montana legislature, not Congress?
Sure. I'm actually on our negotiations committee, and we have started negotiating our CBA. And it's difficult because we can negotiate raises, we can negotiate conditions, but our funding, the pile of money on the table, is determined by the state legislature. There's a funding formula, and that pile is the size that it is. And so we are fighting over that pile. And what we really need to do is make that pile bigger. And also figure out how to distribute that pile equitably. Right now, one of our problems, as you talked about, those federal dollars that we were using to cushion the pile are gone. Some of the programs that we rely on, some of the grants, some of the things that we do to try to supplement this limited pile of money from the state funding formula, those are gone. We do have the STARS Act, which has put some money on the table, but just like the NLRA and some other laws, it's a Band-Aid, and it's a Band-Aid that is in some ways designed to disrupt union unity. So it is a pile of money that is dedicated for starting teachers who absolutely do need to be paid better. But it creates disunity. How are we going to negotiate raises? What will seniority mean? So it's sometimes I think as unions we have to be careful when we're given something. You know, what is the purpose? Is it going to help our union, or is it going to try to drive a wedge? But yeah, we can negotiate. But the other thing that I think where I would think we've got to work on consensus is that for a lot of people, increasing teacher pay is increasing their property taxes. That's the way they view it, and there's a whole reason why it's not really apples to apples, and less than 10 cents of every dollar that you pay in property taxes goes to Missoula County Public Schools. So that's a whole nother question. But it is hard because sometimes with public unions, it's almost like you're negotiating against the taxpayers in your district. And I think that's a difficult thing for us.
Yeah. We could talk like lots more about like school funding and things like that, but I know there's lots more questions on the table. So if that's something you want to know about at the end, there's time for questions. You raise your hand. We will answer that.
Well, so this is, to me, it's interesting about the source of the pile of money, right? Because when you're collectively bargaining, usually, I mean, even in the private sector, the employer has some idea how much money they can work with in terms of increasing pay or increasing benefits. And when your employer is a public institution on the state level, you are limited by politics in the legislature, but also on the federal level. I don't know if you've gone through collective bargaining at all, but it's somewhat similar, right? That you're dealing. Basically, you're negotiating with an agency, with the Forest Service, right? In your case, and they're funded by Congress. You know, and not by tax dollars. Don't get me started. But unlike teachers, for instance, that is tax money that gets paid, and I can see the conflict there. But have you talk about that sort of conflict in collective bargaining for a federal employee for a federal employee?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So our master agreement just was finalized in the past year for the Forest Service. We actually have an incredibly strong master agreement relative to a lot of other public sector unions, and that is valid through 2029. Incidentally, just passed when the current administration ought to expire. And what we keep reminding folks is the only thing that can override that master agreement is an act of Congress. That has actually been pretty effective when the rubber's met the road over the past few months. You probably heard about probationary employees that were illegally fired en masse in the first couple months of this administration. A large part of the basis of those folks, there were 3 separate lawsuits and grievances that were filed to try to get them their jobs back. And for folks who didn't go ahead and get another job after 4 or 5 weeks of being summarily and illegally fired, most of them have returned to work and have been reinstated, which is a huge win, and that was largely because of the protections that we have in our master agreement about what the proper way to go about what's called a reduction in force is, and that was not followed in the way that they fired those probationary employees. A lot of what our master agreement provides for us in terms of working conditions is timelines that ultimately can slow down the process of gutting public lands management agencies or federal agencies across the board right now. And what I keep telling our members is, frankly, right now, time and delays are one of the biggest assets that we have, because when it comes to folks like the 100 some probationary employees that they attempted to fire just on the low and the Bitterroot, the delays that we were ultimately able to put into place for them meant that they have their jobs back. And because those were largely, 75% of them were GS6s and below, making less than $20 an hour, it actually looks like a lot of those folks, if they want to continue to be public servants, will get to continue that, whatever the next round of RIFs is, God willing. I'll also note, maybe just kind of segueing off of what you said, the dynamics in the playbook that we're seeing at the federal level and the state level are not too different. They try to pit our funding and the work that we do against something like the option of raising property taxes, but we just cut the top marginal income tax rate in Montana, the biggest income tax cut in the state's history. That is another way that you could generate revenues for basic public goods like school, like healthcare, like stewards for our public lands, and the exact same thing is going on in the federal budget right now, where they're proposing $2 trillion in cuts to healthcare and to public servants and to public lands, all to fund, again, extending $4.8 trillion of income tax cuts largely for the rich. So it's the exact same playbook. It's pulling money from public goods to try to put more money into the pockets of incredibly wealthy people. And what we're fighting against isn't new. It's just a lot more blatant and a lot more out in the open.
And to your point that you mentioned, and I just want to say this because I testified in the last couple of legislatures against the tax cuts for the wealthy in Montana, the income tax cuts. And this is, I think, the fourth time that tax cuts on the upper margin, income tax cuts, have happened with the wealthy. Now there's no difference. You pay the, if you're making, $14 an hour, you're paying the same amount of rate of income tax as someone making $14 million an hour. So, and that's a little different than the federal, but I just wanted to point that out because that's a great point. That on the one hand, tax cuts. On the other hand, oh no, we can't afford that. We can't afford raises, or we can't afford paying for health care for all, et cetera, et cetera. It's an old game. Keith, didn't want you to be forgotten.
I'm fine.
Good. So tell us something about the process you're going through in collective bargaining with your employer in the private sector. Just, some of the highlights and some of the difficulties you've been...
Sure. Yeah. Real quick, just out of my own curiosity, how many folks here, in attendance, are, currently members of a union or have been? I don't want to, talk about a lot of stuff that's, already known. Okay, cool. Most of you. So, I was hoping to mostly just, try to be a evangelical speaker for starting a union in your own workplace, but y'all already know that.
Amen.
Yeah. DFTBA is a local warehouse affiliated with, perhaps you've heard, owned by the brothers Hank Green and John Green of internet fame. You might have heard of them if you're under the age of 40. We do merchandise fulfillment for online creators, and also some have a arm of the company that does 100% of profits to charity based on merchandise designed by Hank and John. It's complicated, actually, for the accounting, and it makes it hard when you're a union. But we had multiple shakeups sort of in the power structure, and there were enough folks kind of talking about wanting to start a union that just kind of, after having 4 different conversations of people talking about wanting to unionize, I was just like, why don't you all talk to each other? So I like to think of myself as just, kind of shoved everyone a little closer together to help at the start there. But as we move into negotiating our CBA, even a company as sort of outwardly ethically aligned as one that gives some of its profits to charity is one with a notable sort of philanthropic mission that, if you are familiar with the Green Brothers and the things they attempt to do, the amount of resistance you can still encounter is surprising. We have not even gotten to wages yet, but we're also a lot of like very type A grade grind folks who work for a warehouse, I guess, maybe a little bit different in that regard sometimes. We have a built-in design wing. We have a lot of client service stuff for the different creators who we handle. So we have a lot of sort of people who we often are trying to intrude on management rights in a more distinct way than perhaps other goals that you might consider. So we have found that uniquely challenging, but also negotiating against our new CEO, negotiating against our new CEO, who has had no experience who has experience working on boards and administration of larger e-commerce companies, has never actually, surprise, surprise, had to negotiate with a union before. And so we encounter both our own ignorance and limitations as folks kind of DIYing and leaning on Mark very heavily for assistance a lot of the time through this process, but also that we encounter sort of, we don't have an experienced party on the other end, so we're kind of in this weird both time of conflict, but also just trying to figure it out, just make our way through. Is that more or less?
Sure.
Yeah.
So maybe moving on to another question here. Is there, outside of collective bargaining, is there any kind of other difficulties? I mean, Sam talked a lot about difficulties that you're having as a union and facing really unprecedented, on the federal level, this never happened before, right? This is unprecedented kinds of interference, and it's just part of a bigger, mission by the current administration. But other than that, are there any other kind of challenges specific to that you find especially troublesome, or in your conduct as a union, right? Whether that's filing grievances or organizing or collective bargaining. Is there anything you want to add to what you've already said?
Yeah, I mean, I can add. It's real troublesome that they've gutted the National Labor Relations Board. Mm-hmm. We were supposed to have a labor relations rep for all 10 regions of the Forest Service, and 9 out of 10 of them have resigned or left their position in the last 3 months. So we have, and the last one is soon to be gone. So we have literally no point of contact for basic functions of a union, like filing information requests for information that should be publicly available about what's going on. We've been able to crowdsource data, like the fact that we've lost 25 to 30% of Forest Service employees in the last 3 months here in Montana. But that should be information that is available to all of us, because again, these are public goods, public employees, should be public information, and it's been troublesome even for journalists tracking that sort of thing down. So we're dealing with that. We're dealing with the framework of how labor relations are supposed to work at the federal level, at least, truly being gutted, and that's a big addition to the uphill climb that we're dealing with.
I mean, I think as educators, of course, like the looming loss of the Department of Education or that threat is a thing that weighs heavily on us. We get title funding, filters from the federal government to the state, which of course affects our budgets and what we can negotiate for. And I think at the state level, similarly, there's over the last few years legislation that is just out of touch with what is going on in schools and what teachers are doing. And our union ends up spending a lot of time on these little bits of legislation and fighting these little bits of legislation, to make our students' lives better and to make our teachers' lives better. But that legislation is out of touch and not reasonable to implement. And I think that tends, at least from my personal perspective, feel like a big drain on our time and our organizing energy. And of course, part of that is strategic as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that unions really can help with, and one of the things that MFPE does well, they've got a rapid response team, and we get like it's a lot of emails. Every time there is a piece of legislation in the legislature, we get an email that says, call. Here's what it is. Here's the number. Call, send an email. And it is really helpful. I mean, it's been amazing. This session, it's been an onslaught. Like every day, there's a fire to put out. But I think coming back to your point, that it really matters when people call, when people express their opinions. We've had legislators say publicly, I don't want to vote this way, but I've gotten so many calls that I have to. And I think that's what it's all about, right? You want your legislator to represent you, but that means making those calls. And I think that's one of the things unions can do well, is organize people, encourage people to make those calls, and organize the organized. If that
Yeah,
makes
I think it has worked well this last session. I think then personally, I also feel our union spends a lot of time on that. We
Right.
could
we could be teaching.
We could be teaching. Yes. Yeah.
I think on like the hopeful note of like what a union can do is that for we have a lot of younger employees at the warehouse that haven't experienced the idea of being able to take and hold power. Like, I understand everything that is the federal government right now, but also, when you're just an e-commerce company and, capitalism's the bad guy, you're at the vicissitudes of the market, of tariffs, of whims of management that so many people, Gen X, my generation on down, have just come to think of as common in the workplace. A capricious boss who lays off people or comes up with varying new ideas and plans for cuts. And the formation of a union, we also encountered a situation of some budgetary concerns that did have to come and be negotiated with us. It was uncomfortable, it was stressful, but also the proof positive of what it can be like for when they come to a 47-person union and say, we want to lay off 18% of the workforce. Like, at least they had to talk to us about it. Every other job I've ever had, that just would have happened. And the amount, just knowing that anyone could avail themselves of at least that much protection, that you could at least make them negotiate with you, is such a value to this concept of organizing, of unionizing together, that I think that can be such a net positive, even in a private situation.
Right. Talk a little bit about, if at all, relations you have with the general community, right? It touched upon it somewhat as a union. What sort of engagement do you have with the community at large, non-union people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're running mills, we're running levies right now, so there's some engagement that comes along with that. And Melissa spoke about that just a minute ago. And I think when of course, we're engaging with our parents and our students, every day. So in that way, there's community engagement. And then the other thing is, when we go to school board meetings, those are public meetings. There's often parents there. There's frequently parents there. So we would be engaging with the community in that way. In terms of, I don't know that there's things that we do locally that beyond our just day-to-day jobs of kind of organizing locally within our community. We're other than our affiliates.
I would say exactly, what Katie described. We're a very public-facing union. almost everybody in Missoula has some interaction with the public schools, whether you're a parent, whether you're a student, a graduate. So we are a very public-facing union. And one of the things that I love the idea of a general strike. I think that's super important. But I think it's not just the groundwork of getting people organized, but building understanding in the community. Because the fact of the matter is, a general strike is going to hurt us. Like, if you're an oligarch, if you're one of the 1%, you're going to be able to insulate yourself. I mean, maybe not your spreadsheet, maybe not your total net value, but some of the difficulties that would be felt in our community. Like, I know a lot of teachers that if we were to attempt a strike, would feel that that was a betrayal, that we were betraying the students, we were betraying the families of this community. So if we were going to put ourselves in a position to do that, that takes a lot of groundwork, a lot of explaining to community members, listen, we don't want to do this. This is not about you and me. This is not about me and your kids, who I care about deeply. This is about our society, our greater community. And I think that's a lot of work that we'd have to do.
Yeah, I mean, we provide very necessary childcare to many families in this community. And even if those families were ideally on strike with us in a general strike, there are families who still would rely on that and need that. So, so I think that makes, a strike when you're a very essential worker. Not that there aren't essential workers, but when you're in that position, it makes that organizing, I think, even more important, but even more challenging.
Yeah, our community relations are largely a matter of trying to push information out about what's going on. And, as I've said before, in a environment where most of our members don't feel at liberty to speak publicly at events or to newspapers or to media, I think that plays a really crucial role in making sure they don't feel alone and in making sure people know what they ought to be angry about with what's going on. So all that's to say, follow us at NIFI Local 60, Instagram, like and share. Yeah.
All right. You want to?
It's different for us because being in the process of negotiating, we're not ready to go to the community yet for assistance in any ways. But it's a strategic maneuver right now. That we hold that as like a card. Should I put that on the radio? Sorry. They know it. But yeah, but small community things as well. An affiliate company also owned by Hank recently voted to unionize. They're part of a national labor union, the Creative Workers of America. They just had their vote tallied and joined that. So, we've had some cross-talk and cross-pollination of being able to advise each other, sort of, or like, I had people clandestinely come to me and ask about, like difficulties they can anticipate and things like that. They'll have a little more support from their national union when they go to bargain. But yeah, at this point, there's always that kind of one-on-one thing that you can be a sounding board for other people who are interested in organizing.
So I'm going to. This question wasn't on the list. It's kind of a variation, but how is it possible, or what sort of ideas do you have to increase the support of the public? I mean, especially for the two public unions, right? That it's crucial. Any idea? I mean, any ideas or I know. I'll just give an example that I've studied pretty closely. Is the Unified Teachers of Los Angeles, right? And they had a strike in 2019, I think it was. They used this organizing method that Stephen talked about. They had a 99% out, right, for 34,000 teachers, okay? That's a lot of teachers. And you can imagine, and they're all political persuasions. I mean, all the difference that 34,000 people would contain is contained there. And I think one of the promises of unions is that it does bind people together in ways that I think other organizations can't do. But how is it? Well, what the Los Angeles teachers did is they, as Melissa said, it takes a lot of work, and they did two things. One is bargaining for the common good. I don't know if you've heard of that before. It's actually an organization that came out of the LA strike in 2019, which they won in 5 days, by the way. And they were up against billionaires who were trying to privatize the Los Angeles school system. Okay, and they beat them handily. But one of the things that they did is they included in their bargaining things for the community, like green space in schools, having nurses in every school that is open to the community, not just to the students, things like that. And that helped build alliances with the community. And they also spent a lot of time organizing the students and the parents. I mean, they spent a lot of time doing that. And to the point where they, in their first day out on strike, they had 34,000 teachers, but they also had another 20,000 students and parents and just people in the community coming out to support. Now that, to me, that's really inspiring. And I think, make no mistake, it takes, I'll say this, that the Los Angeles teachers had only 32 paid organizers on staff, right? And they were able to use, to train other people in, other teachers, how to organize their fellow workers, as it were. And so it could scale up, right? You can't pay enough people to be organizers. I've been an organizer, I know the pay wasn't great. And I could be doing 3 jobs at once, and still wouldn't be enough. So I'm just sort of suggesting that there might be other ways in which we could build relations with the community, that the community sees that when the teachers go on strike, yeah, that's me going on strike. I want to support that because they're standing up for me.
Yeah, I think all of those are great. I think it does have to be a community. And I think one of the things that we have to do, and maybe Sam, this is something that you guys probably do already, but I think we could all do more, is, wear our union membership on our sleeve, literally. Let people know in the community, I'm a union member. And I provide a service. Part of it is letting people know what you do. A lot of us work hard and people don't notice until, there's a fire. Oh my gosh. Or they need something from school. And so I think wearing, your identity that says I'm a union member, here's my local, and having those interactions, just building awareness.
How about Red for Ed?
Yeah.
Years ago, I remember that went on.
Yeah.
T-shirts, Red for Ed, and that sort of prepares the community. There's a teacher, It's going to be difficult. Parents want their teachers to teach their students, other kids, and that sort of thing. But if you publicize beforehand and work up to it, that might help.
And I think it's things like planning for childcare and helping people organize in the community. This is what's going to happen. How would you plan for this? You have to show people what you do and show people why they need more and you need more, right? And like you said, this kind of common good idea.
Yeah. I think, on top of what you said, we need to, not just as union members, but as public employees or employees of whatever, value providing company you're working for, we need to show up and we need to talk loudly and publicly about the services we provide for the people that we're serving. I think frankly, as an agency, or a lot of our federal agencies could do better, a lot better at that. We are very risk averse and very cautious about talking about the work that we're doing unless it's been vetted by 6 or 7 levels, and that it doesn't need to be like that. And it doesn't need to be like that if you are off duty and you're going to a community meeting or a town hall to talk about the amazing project you've been doing for waterway restoration down in the Bitterroot, or about how many fires we were able to catch last year that didn't become mega fires. At the union level, something that I've been saying a lot to my coworkers, because I work in Wildland Fire, and a lot of folks just 2 or 3 months ago kept saying, well, they're not coming after primary firefighters right now. I don't want to make this about us. I think a lot of people have realized that that's no longer the case in a very literal sense, but I keep telling folks, when they come after one of us, they're coming after all of us, and that's not just a matter of solidarity. It's not just a matter of solidarity, it's a matter of practicality, because when they come after the folks who keep your trails clear, they're coming after all of our ability to go out and go hiking and, show our kids the beauty of the national forest. And when they come after, teacher pay and, only provide pay increases for incoming teachers, not people who've dedicated decades of their lives working hard for too little compensation. They're coming after all of us who have kids or might someday have kids going to public schools in Montana. So I think that's something we need to keep repeating to each other, both at our workplace and in our communities. And I think it's a circle that we need to just expand as wide as possible, because it's not just about when they're coming after public servants. It's about when they're coming after, the guy who's lost his job at a mill up in Sealy because we haven't created a system where his job is viable and where he can feed his family as well.
Yeah, great. I love that, using solidarity and practicality in the same sentence. That is, I'm gonna steal that. My last question, and a lot of people, as we've kind of touched upon, a lot of people have no idea how unions work, right? Or have very little sense about, well, what's a union, right? And maybe each of you can explain just real basically, how is it you become a member of your union? How is it that you're involved in making decisions for the union? How does it work internally? If you could speak a little bit about that.
Sure. At our level, at least, it is largely volunteer-based. For the entire Forest Service, we have 16 paid staff across the country with 20 to 30,000 union-eligible members. So most of our work as local executives it's volunteer work where we're willing to do something on top of whatever our day job is. And I don't think just at our local level, when I go to our meetings of our national union, where frankly I've got plenty of dissatisfaction with the quality of work sometimes, or the speed at which the things that we find important are coming out. It's just who volunteers and who's willing to step up and do the work and dedicate the time. So it's as simple for us as attending one of our monthly meetings the second Wednesday of every month, and responding to the monthly call that we give to say, if you're interested in being an executive and getting trained to become a union steward, which is a really amazing training that IAW puts on every year, let us know. And every person who does that, like Bobby in the audience here, typically finds that to be a very enriching experience and helpful to all of us.
I'll talk a little bit about our sort of local level. So yeah, you become a union member. When I became a union member, we were able to, and we still are we were able to deduct our union dues directly from our paycheck. There's been lots of legislation to get rid of that and to make that to make that illegal. And so we've transitioned to a different dues paying system, mostly, but yeah, you sign your form and off you go. Our union has a representative system, so for every 15 union members in a building, there is one elected representative who serves on the board of directors. And again, it's also all volunteer. A lot of times, unfortunately, it's like begging people to be a building rep and to represent those 15 members within that building. And so Melissa and I have both been building reps at different times. And then within the BOD, there's an elected executive board. We have a president, 2 vice presidents, a secretary, a treasurer, and reps at large. And then we can also, and I apologize because I don't know every single nuance here because of how big our union is, but there are elected positions through MFPE, and then we also send 1 representative to the NEA every year at our state level. And yeah, we have meetings. That's how we talk to our employers, and that's how we advocate for ourselves and for our students. Is we have a lot of meetings. I think if you know this, if you've worked in a union, that you're having meetings, you're in dialogue, and you just do the best that you can. Do you want to add?
I do want to add.
Yeah,
And
I know you do.
I know. Well, because honestly, I'm so glad to be here today because at the end of the day today, I was like, oh, I'm not happy. Because the fact of the matter is, it's hard.
Yeah.
When you are a union rep, you cannot walk down the hall without someone saying, I need to ask you about this, or I need to tell you about this. And while today I wasn't my best self, and I wasn't thinking, wow, I'm so glad I'm doing this, I was thinking, gosh, I have a lot to get done. But it is, like being here and thinking about it, yeah, it's wonderful that people in our building know that they have a person that they can come to. And sometimes the question they ask you is a union question, and sometimes it's not. But people know that they have someone to come to. And I think that's a really valuable thing. It's an exhausting thing, but it is a very valuable thing. And then it's for us to kind of sort back to them to say, that is a union issue, I'll take it to the next level, or that's not a union issue, hey, can I direct you this way? Could we approach it in a different way? But it's a lot of
Yeah, I had a
sharing.
Yeah, I mean, you're teaching your classes, someone pops their head in your door, and they're like, hey, I need to talk to you for 1 minute, and you have to set things aside. That happened today. I had a question about someone was nominated to be a union building rep, and they wanted to know about that, and someone wanted to know about how they advance on the salary matrix, and you're their go-to person. They're going to ask you in the middle of your class sometimes.
Kids were happy about that.
they yeah.
As a
Cell phones immediately.
As an independent union, it's a lot of work. We're a democratic organization, so we try to decide most of our major functions through consensus vote, through simple majority. We wrote our own constitution. That took a significant amount of time and effort, but we tried to build as non-hierarchical an organization as we could because we are only currently representing about 30-some people, 40-some people at the start of when we formed. So we have 2 co-chairs, secretary and treasurer, but those are just more for administrative function. And we try to do as much as we can online through Slack, a lot of, emoji voting, honestly, for things that come up. We do, and it's easier to talk to each other because we're a smaller workforce, but it is an intense amount of work, and, you encounter the difficulties of, in a small organization, of people who don't wish to be involved as much, and that's perfectly fair. But we always want to avoid the pitfalls of people filling too many voids and forming an accidental hierarchical type of situation that you don't want to have, of siloing influence or power in any type of a situation like that, and then just asking too much of people, working them too hard. That said, it is fun to do. It's cool. It's a lot of work, but it's good. And like to the earlier question about what can you do is, yeah, evangelize. We started a union. We're a warehouse that packs T-shirts and rolls posters. We got 30 people, and we have other administrative functions and design crew and art directors, and we started a union. You could have one at your workplace. And you will encounter the resistance I encountered of an employee older than I am who's like, this job isn't so bad. And you're like, yeah, there's a generation, with that, the Protestant work ethic of the idea of like, well, this job's not so bad. What do you need a union for? And it's like, that is not the point. A union is not an emergency pull trigger. A union is this foundational type of idea. And I think I've been seeing that more and more. Like, we have much younger people, and the Zoomers and, I hate to do generational stuff, but like younger employees are much more receptive to the idea of unions than like people my age and a little bit older. And we encountered no resistance at all. When we had our card signing, we did our little presentation to everybody signed.
All right.
I'm sorry. As a boomer, you have to object to everything, right? Sorry.
So we're going to take questions from the audience, and there's food here. Don't forget the food. Keith is yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well.
Yeah, because people need to hear you.
All righty, can everybody hear me all right? Yep. Okay. Just wanted everybody to know this is my first time to this meeting, and also wanted to let you know that I am specifying here a recovering Christian conservative. Okay. I don't hear a lot of knives or guns coming out, so that's good. But I did have just a basic question, very simple, straightforward, because for myself, I read up the definition of socialism before I came here and realized in some aspects I'm already participating in it in a different sort of way. So I was wondering if you could, for the whole class, for anybody else who doesn't know, if anybody from the panel there could be so kind as to define socialism as best you can, because I think it would be good for people to understand that it's not a dirty word, it's not a bad word, it's not a word like conservatives have been brainwashed and trained as a trigger word to lose their minds at. So just wanted to ask if you guys could define that for me, please.
Well, that might be a question I could answer better. I don't know if someone wants to. I knew you were. So socialism simply is that the employees or the capital that makes things, the building, whatever, is something that is owned not by a private interest, but is owned and managed democratically, okay, at some level. So my favorite go-to example is the public library. It's a perfect example of, and we have a public library employee right here who's also a member of the union, and he's running for Ward 1 City Council. So I got all that in, Lucas. Lucas Moody. So if you think about the public library, okay, it's run by a board, that is at least partly democratically accountable. It's owned by all of us. It's paid by all of us, and we all can use it, right? So that's an example. That's one really good example, and there's plenty of others, right? You could talk about our road system. You could talk about the military. You could talk about lots of things that aren't privately owned. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Yes.
Well, I have to put.
You have to project. It's not.
Oh, it's not
amplified. Yeah.
You're sure you want me to project?
Yes, just like that.
Okay. The question I wanted to ask folks was a concern in how do we raise funds for people who will need that while the strikes are going on, because that's a big preventative thing for a lot of people wanting to go on strike. How do we pay for our childcare? How do we do we organize potlucks? Do we, I know that's done, and maybe Mark has a lot of information from the teachers that did this in 2019. That would be great. I'd love to hear that. I wanted to brag a little bit. I was a member, I was a secretary at Columbia University, and I joined the union, and we won a historic win, first time ever, childcare for secretaries, okay? And we kept our 4-week paid vacation. They wanted to get rid of it. We kept it. It was UAW. And the trash, picking up trash in New York City, they said, we won't. Can you imagine? No trash pickup in New York City. I love unions. I always will.
So maybe I could ask you, do you have strike funds in any of your unions? No. So if you were to go out on strike, you would be taking an economic hit. All of you, absolutely. Yeah.
And for a lot of people, your medical insurance, I mean, that is almost, you can put the money away and maybe plan for a strike, but insurance is obviously a really huge issue.
One of the things that in the big UAW strikes against the big three automakers, that it wasn't this last one, but I think it was the one before, the automakers cut off everyone's health insurance that was out on strike. Okay, that was, and they had to walk that back. Okay, for various reasons, but that's another weapon. It's actually another reason to have, Medicare for all, so that it becomes not an issue, right? It's not a leverage. Any other questions?
So I have a question. So I was a teacher for a while, and it is very easy to be a part of a teacher union in Montana. I previously worked in Mississippi, and right to work state, no union representation of any public employee. And then moving here, it was so wonderful to be a part of a union, but it was so easy to become a part of a union. And now I am in the nonprofit sector, and I feel very excited because I am in a place where apparently there were talks of a union before I entered, but then some of the key players moved on and the union never formed. But I am interested, and I think forming a union in a nonprofit is maybe a bit different than forming in a for-profit business. But I am curious about, especially maybe any size organization, of what those beginning steps, and I think often it is conversations with your coworkers, which happen, but I think once you've started to have conversations and that there is interest, what are basic steps that people who are not in a union and are not publicly affiliated, what are some practical steps that people can take?
Sure, yeah. Email Mark. We started with a very kind of quiet rollout. I was just being a little more ready to go and agitate everybody once I was hearing it, And yeah, a lot of people just don't know, so you start trying to find resources online, some simple explainers of perhaps what is a union, or what kind of protections can a union offer you, what are some of the potential benefits. Then we started with a small handful of people. Rachel, who you see over here at the booth, get a button or a T-shirt. Got to shout out the merch. And so we, started forming a plan of attack, and Rachel knew Mark, and so helped us with that. But then it just sort of became each person talks to 3 people. You just sort of phone tree out. And, very quietly, maybe not at work on premises. But it is very challenging in nonprofits. There are a lot of nonprofits right now, the Quality Project, the Trevor Project, they're really having great difficulty organizing. And I think that's a very common, what you will experience is a thing we do, because we have a component that is entirely charitable, of all profits to charity. Sort of think like the Newman Zone type of setup, they will use that as another tactic against you. Oh, but we do good work. We're the good guys in capitalism. And that like, isn't it great that you get to work in this type of a situation, as if that you don't, as if those aren't parallel ideas of like, well, we do good, but also we could treat the people who do that good well as well, and make sure you have that living as well. But yeah, you just gotta kind of, you do just kind of have to build it up. And the more solid, I think Mark's main counsel to us when we were starting was like, the more solid that work is at the start, the easier it will be. You don't want to have just like a small percentage of your folks ready to go, raring to go, and then try to hold a vote. You want to make sure you have got like 3/4 of your people locked in and ready to vote yes, and then you have leeway to gain or lose depending on how management treats you. But yeah, you want to make sure you're having, and then just off-site. A great place to organize is the union bar, I found. But if that's not your thing, that's fine. Coffee shops, library, wherever you want to hang out. But off-site little things like that, and just kind of like going over materials and stuff. And there are organizations that can help, or that could provide for that as well.
Like the Western Montana Workers Alliance.
Well, Western Montana Workers Alliance has been pivotal.
So,
for us.
and I was going to say the Western Montana Workers Alliance helps people get trained in advice and all that kind of stuff. And we actually are engaged right now with one more serious than the other, but two nonprofits in town to try to get them organized. And I would refer you to Rachel. If you want to talk with Rachel afterwards, she can give you the skinny on that. All right, and Robbie, you're next.
So this is perhaps too geekish a question, but I think your name is for Alyssa. I think your name, Melissa. You'd said you had worked as a lawyer for the railroad workers unions, and it's my understanding that they're covered under a whole different set of labor law than everybody else is. Could you give something of the history about why that is?
So they're covered by the Railway Labor Act, and it's actually very important that they are. Part of it was just the significance of rail traffic, but as a union, it gave them a special, you go straight to federal court. You don't have to go through the NLRB.
What's the NLR?
National Labor Relations Board. So under the National Labor Relations Act, it started out as a great thing. The Railway Labor Act had some great protections. It allowed unions to strike. You'd go straight into federal court. They would work together. All the unions would go out on strike simultaneously. And I represented them in the mid-90s, late 90s. And it was very fun. It was exciting. It was a different time. And they successfully would walk out. They'd get it all together, they'd get it all planned, and then they'd go out, and it was then just like a race to the courthouse. And it was fun until the courts began to say that the Interstate Commerce Act overrode the Railway Labor Act. So when I started practicing, they were equal, and we would argue about whether they had a right to strike. And by the end of my practice, they would say, listen, that's interfering with interstate commerce. You can't do that. Well, obviously it's interfering with interstate commerce. That's why we're doing it. But this was the shift, the Reagan years, PATCO. This was the shift of the Reagan years, PATCO. We just saw a change in the court system of how the right to strike, the right to organize, how that was viewed. But the railway unions were able to, and are able, they're very unified across all of the fields, and that gives them a lot of strength.
I might add, too, I represented some workers who are also covered under the Railway Act, but they were airport caterers, right? So the big silver sky chefs, the big silver boxes that could pull down, the middle of the airplane. I worked with organized people who cooked that food, put it together, packed that up, packed it onto the plane. It also was under the Railway Act, and I don't know the history of that, but the other thing I want to say too is that one thing that I've learned from, it was a teacher in West Virginia actually that said this, and I'm sure other people have said this before, but the whole Red for Ed thing that happened about 10 years ago, someone asked her, because in West Virginia it was illegal for teachers to go on strike, okay? Yeah, and in a lot of places public employees can't go on strike, right? Federal employees can't go on strike? Nope. Not legally anyway, but what she said was, there's no such thing as an illegal strike, only an unsuccessful one. And if you understand how strikes work, it makes a lot of sense, okay? Because one of the demands you have to go back to work is that there's going to be no punishment for people walking out on strike, okay? One last question.
Oh, Brendan was...
Brendan?
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you everyone for coming. Just wanted to point out the Western Montana Democratic Socialists of America chapter business meeting is going to be next Saturday the 10th at, I believe, 11 a.m. at JRPC, the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center. It would really be great to convert some of this energy we have here into a strong workers' movement. I also wanted to point out that Montanans for Palestine are raising money for families in Gaza at the back. We're trying to hit $5,000 over the course of the month of May, and so much of the work we do organizing as a working class is to stop the imperial war machine that is, pressing down on us as a society. So please consider donating. My question is about not losing energy in the course of potentially organizing for a strike into the Democratic Party. What happens in our union, as you're familiar, is, sorry, I'm a teacher, so just this might be familiar to the two teachers up there, is that 2024, most of the union energy, from what I was able to see, went toward electing Democratic Party candidates, and a lot of work was spent, on John Tester. 2025 came around, and it's a legislative year, and we're beating back all these crazy bills from Helena. 26 is going to come around, and I can guarantee you the message from top is going to be, we've got to get some Democrats in office. 27, a legislative year. 28, Trump's out of office. I think for 2028 for me is an enormous organizing, year for potentially a general strike. But for a lot of people, it's just the next big presidential election. And the main mode of sort of organizing for them is going to be, something that I consider potentially, at best, time wasting, and at worst, harmful to the working class. Do you feel, the question for everybody, that, or how do you believe your work as a union organizer intersects with party politics? And do you feel that it can be beneficial or harmful?
I'm going to answer, and then I'm going to hand it to Sam, because I think that one of the really difficult issues for us, and we're here, this is the Democratic Socialist function, but it's important to realize that, the number of our union members who are socialists is very small. And I think that is a difficulty. I don't want to call out Brendan, but Brendan has tried to do some things at our state level and within the union, and has faced some really significant pushback because our union is not politically unified. We're just not. I grew up in Ohio, where the labor movement is a pretty socially conservative movement. They're going to vote Democratic, but I think one of the questions that we have to address is, can we unify our members politically? Is that even possible? I mean, we have got members from across the political spectrum, and I think in especially when we go to our annual meeting, and it is highway patrol, it is parole officers, it is nurses, it's a whole lot of people, and to come away with one politically unifying theme is so hard. I don't even, it's something that I kind of struggle with. I don't know how to do it, and I'm guessing that in forestry, you might not be politically unified around the socialist.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the folks I work with, I can tell you voted Republican in the last election, and I don't think that. I think that in a lot of ways, neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party represents their interest on a whole variety of issues. But I think that our role as a union that represents a lot of working class folks who voted for both parties, and maybe in a great scenario neither party, but hopefully still voted, is accountability. And it's drawing a hard line to say, when you do this, when our representative allows 30% of people who are managing something that we all care about, like public lands, to be fired, to be forced into retirement, to be harassed out of their jobs, that there's going to be a political price to pay. And I think the question of what you do positively after that, the answer is to organize. That's what we've been able to do so far. Our roles in terms of dues-paying members, as a proportion of the members that we represent, have almost doubled in the last 3 months. And when people are attacking the people who provide public services or the people you work with, that should be an organizing opportunity. And when our representatives aren't saying a damn thing about the things we care about being attacked, that should be an opportunity for accountability. And I think that's the productive role that we can play and represent everybody.
We're a private, we're an independent union. If I advocate for, the union can't, if our union advocates for anything politically, we have to start paying taxes. And as the treasurer of my organization, I would like to avoid that. So on my own personal stance is I completely agree, and I would advocate for perhaps complete anarchy, if at all possible. But yes, I don't know what we could do apart from just keep moving the Overton window back to the left, and keep reassuring people, and keep realizing that a lot of people operate in self-interest. I keep trying to get that in my mind, and that neither party really right now, there is a weird flux moment, I think, that neither party owns the idea of being for the working class, and I think that there might be a need that can be filled by a better idea.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Well, on that note, thank you. Let's give a big round of applause. You guys have been great, and thank you. Good work for your service here. Good work. And thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And Rachel has something to say here.
Hi, my name is Rachel Calderon Navarro. I'm one of two co-chairs at Western Montana DSA. Great work, everyone, for coming tonight. We are a pretty active chapter. We have a lot of events coming up. We have a lot of working groups that are doing a lot of great work. Obviously, this was kind of put on by our labor working group in conjunction with our social and outreach group that puts on events like this, and also we're the people who call you and say, hey, come to this thing. We have a bunch of events coming up, but before I talk about that, let me just quickly talk about our working groups. So, like I said, labor working group, if you're interested in joining, or if you want to organize your workplace, grab one of these. If you're interested, if you just are like, what is capitalism, then grab one of these. We have a newly formed eco-socialist working group. We're working on doing something like weed pools and some hikes and possibly like mushroom gathering, stuff like that. But if you don't know what eco-socialism is, we have one of these, little zine. We also have an editorial and communication working group that writes a lot of editorials, and we have a new zine of the best of editorial working group volume 1. So grab one of these. If this was really inspiring to you, and if you also are like, God, nobody really aligns with me anymore, Democrats, Republicans, be a socialist. But we do have, every year we have an annual barbecue for May Day. It is this Saturday at Kiwanis Park at 1 p.m. from 1 to 5. So if you're around, join us. It's potluck style. If you want to do one of our meetings, grab one of this thing has all the info, but social and outreach meeting is on Monday the 5th. Our monthly member meeting is on the 10th. Eco-socialist meeting is on May 12th at GoodWorks. And then our labor working group meeting is on May 21st. So yeah, great work incoming, everyone. And if you have any questions, just locate a person wearing red, probably.
One more announcement. I just want to say, on the one hand, thank you to MCAT, Missoula Community Access Television, for providing video of all these events. And thank you to Free Cycles, our sponsor for this evening. And so, if you're on the way out the door going that way, there's a donation box for Free Cycles. Please donate them because they are by far the coolest organization in town. Possible exception.